Okay, great. So hello everyone. We are recording this particular B2B shizzle. We've got a few attendees here. Obviously, Louisa is presenting to us. This is a trial of the recording of these fortnightly meetings. Again, really briefly, we have them every fortnight on a Thursday at 4 p.m. A different B2B marketing topic. In this case, it is the Thursday before Christmas. We've had a few dropouts, as you can imagine, but it's good to be able to record it, and then I'll send it out to the group. Louisa Dunbar is a UX expert.
Yeah.
Happy to come. It's going to be discussing kind of storytelling and UX as part of B2B. So yeah, in terms of the format of this kind of session, we can kind of go back and forth. We don't have kind of the wider group to make that discussion. But obviously, Andy's joined us here as well, so it'd be great to hear kind of your perspective, especially from different kind of agencies that you work with, in terms of UX and storytelling for B2B marketing. So yeah, Louisa, if you want to give it an intro, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, well, thank you for that intro. So in terms of storytelling, yeah, it's become a topic, isn't it, that's kind of gained a bit more traction in recent years in terms of the power it has in marketing, and obviously I'm particularly interested in it from a website point of view, user experience, and how it can enhance. But it really came to my attention because I have, and our agency has a sort of interest in terms of the neuro side of things, and neuroscience, how the brain works, and how we essentially make sense of the world and make decisions, and how we can use behavioral science in order to basically encourage those engagements on our website, and using psychology in order to kind of guide the user along the way. So yeah, that's a bit of a summary in why storytelling from my point of view is really important. And yeah, the reason how it comes in, whether it's B2B or B2 anything, is that it can easily influence the course of action. So that's the psychology element. So you can use it to persuade of our credibility as well, and we can, yes, incite behavioural change. Governments use it, so it can be very powerful. And the reason it's powerful is because, yeah, it's a primal form of communication. It's something that's inherent in us, and has been used, back in the Stone Age. So it's and how we use storytelling is that we can effectively explain how something works. So it's about having that beginning, middle, end, and we can provide that order to our audience, and also that hope as well, so they can see the full journey and then the outcome. And also you can really help the user. So from a website point of view, if you're trying to get somebody to buy into your product or buy into your service, if you can make them feel like they are the hero of your story, that's really compelling. So yeah, there's a lot of power in here, and that's why it's interesting. And in terms of the neuroscience of it, so oxytocin is the neurochemical which is responsible for empathy and narrative transportation. And when the brain synthesizes oxytocin, people are inherently more trustworthy, they're more generous, charitable, and yeah, compassionate. So you can see why all those things are really important to people who are trying to sell stuff. Yeah, so influencing economic decisions, influencing behaviors, there's a lot of power in there. So that's why it's interesting. I'm happy to go on, or you can ask me questions.
I love the idea of the kind of the hero and making them kind of the hero. Do you subscribe to that kind of view that whatever the product and services you're kind of offering to get to like the promised land, it's that if they are Luke Skywalker, you are like the lightsaber, or the product is the lightsaber in terms of
and that's a great storytelling. Yeah, absolutely. You're gonna get your that statement alone is that story. You're kind of helping people imagine, and exactly that. Yeah, it's interesting because it's not. I know we've discussed this as, you know, in terms of B2B, but yeah, it really is not all that different from B2C. It's all about the human to human connection that we're trying to generate here. You know, people buy from people. That's it. It is all relative, basically. But yeah, no, there's lots of different forms on a website. So storytelling can come in different forms. So like obviously on the about page, you'd have the business essentially explaining, you know, what happened when they first started, and then the next stage and the next stage, and that's great. You know, it's important for people to see that progression. There's also sort of the more emotive story, and that usually comes from the owner of the business, and you know why they set it up in the first place. You know, it's all, if you've ever watched Dragon's Den, then that's what that's all about, isn't it? Having that story to really connect with users. So those are the two sort of aspects from the About Us page. That's you know, really important, and every website should have it in one form, and it shouldn't be too dry. We do this and we blah blah blah. It's just about, you know, bringing that emotional element to it. And then obviously case studies is another one. So I'm just talking about the really sort of standard ones, and then I can happily talk you through, you know, where storytelling can really come into its own. But yeah, case studies, obviously having the, you know, here's the problem, here's how we solved it, and here's the outcome. You know, how you've taken somebody from A to B, and you know how you could essentially see yourself in this, and why you should work with us as well. So that's the standard ones, I suppose.
It's really interesting to hear you talking about the about page on a website, and obviously that's a really important part of engaging with a prospect, isn't it? But I'm just this afternoon writing a pitch deck for a startup company that wants to raise some investment, and I was thinking there about that origin story and how I hadn't built enough, I guess, emotion into that story as to why they've arrived at the need to build out this solution.
That's it, yeah. And that actually brings me on really nicely to a point I definitely wanted to make. So, you know, there's a couple of different ways. I probably won't have time to go through them all today, but you know, having a really clear mission statement is a really good starting point. And it needs to be emotive. It shouldn't just be, you know, I don't know, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but you know, having something that generates some sort of passion within, you know, the brand, or demonstrates that passion within a brand. I mean, so we've, just to give you an example, our one is to make the web a more human-centered, user-friendly and accessible place. So that implies that we don't think it is at the moment. There's you know, it's really strong. I'm not saying it's perfect by any means, but you know, you've got to start somewhere. And you know, it's a one-line story as it is. So stories can come in all shapes and sizes, and you can have, you know, 3-word stories. I don't know if you've ever heard of those, but yeah, you know, in terms of the bigger picture from a business point of view, yeah, we would need a little bit more than that. But yeah, a mission statement is a story. And then once you've got a thread like that, the mission, it can be weaved into absolutely everything you do in your marketing, in your website. And yeah, so and in terms of how I use that, just to give you an example, you know, everything I talk about on LinkedIn is with those things in mind. Our website, I have grand plans next year to, you know, really enhance our the insight section on our website, so that those 3 elements, the human-centered, user-friendly, accessible place, that is all really talked about and is weaved into all of that content. So those are going to be the 3 pillars essentially, right? Pillar content. And then yeah, because it is, you know, that emotion as well, it's how you stay memorable, and that's how people can remember you essentially. So does that make sense?
The golden thread really makes sense to me, and we teach that on a pitch training course that we do, is to weave that golden thread throughout all of the messages you put together in that pitch deck or in whatever you're doing. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. In terms of, say, from like a B2B context, when we're like thinking about storytelling, obviously, you know, the idea is that it's people to people, but there's a decision-making set, and you're influencing different people within that decision-making set to make a decision to use that product. And often the pathway to sale is slightly longer, and it takes a lot of different turns than it does necessarily with the user. Maybe with kind of pest to power more so, especially at Christmas time, maybe there's a bit more in terms of that. But what do you think of the storytelling? Do you dial up the storytelling to resonate with the kind of end user or to stakeholders?
Sorry, say what?
Just with with the decision maker or key stakeholders that are, ultimately going to make the decision on a purchase. Be good to know that context.
Yeah, you're right, because you've got to consider the different types of users, and there are going to be things that relate to different people at different stages of the journey. So obviously this is about identifying what their drivers are, and what is it that's really driving them, and that's going to be really different from, say, an executive who's been tasked by their manager to research into a business that could help them do something. Their motives are going to be very different to the manager or the business owner, or the C-suite. So it's really important to do your research and understand what those drivers are in terms of each of those touch points, and once you understand those drivers, and it's going to be things that you probably don't expect as well, such as that the executive might just, they really want to do well in their job. That it's not that they're particularly fussed by the business that's delivering it, as long as they are going to be looking. If they're referring you as a business, then they need to be sure that you are trustworthy, and that you're, if they refer you, you're not going to let them down. And similarly, the C-suite are going to be probably very, I'm generalizing massively here, but they're going to be more interested in, right, how has this business got the data to back up? Are they able to deliver exactly what we want? All that, there's going to be very different drivers. So yeah, it's about identifying those first, and it is emotional. So decisions happen on an emotional level, and I think marketing nowadays is becoming more and more aware of this, and we're able to then, once we know what those emotional things are, then we can obviously resonate much better with them, and it can be incorporated into that storytelling. So there are 5 elements in the story. So the why, the what, the how, the with, and the outcome. So why might your target audience be looking to work with you in the first place? What's your approach, or thinking on this? And what's your unique perspective? How do you achieve all of this? How do you solve this problem? And then what tools do you then use to achieve this? So that just goes into a bit more detail, comforts the detail-orientated people. And then, what is the end result that you're hoping to achieve? And you can basically weave all of that into the content on your website. And it just comes across much stronger and more cohesive.
I love the kind of concept, I think kind of the startup world, about the aha moment, and not the band, where you just kind of like get it. You just have that kind of trigger moment. Do you think kind of storytelling is important to that? Otherwise, if things become too factual, then it doesn't kind of stand out. Or is it you bring it to life through storytelling, then you get the concept, which I suppose is very much kind of applicable in about us in terms of where you came from, or it's kind of use in terms of weaving that into making the conversion process work better.
Yeah, for sure. So that marketing and sales in general has moved on so much from what it was. So in the days of Ogilvy, it was everything was sold on features. So if you're selling a car, it'd be like, this has a gear stick of, I'm not very car literate, bad example, but you know what I mean. It was all sold on what was in the car, and that was because that was all they had to go on. There was in today's world, it's we have access to so much information. We can pretty much find out anything we want. So brands have to work much harder to convince users of you know, how they are solving the problem, but also to convince them to trust them. And you have to do a lot more nurturing. Yeah, marketing in general is a lot harder nowadays. So yeah, the times have changed, and I think that aha moment is built up over time, because you know there's certain touch points before you actually think, well, actually I'm going to consider this brand. And it's about that information age, and how we keep, you know, applying our story and weaving it into everything we do, and that applies across you know, social media, the website, email marketing, etc., etc. So it is about, yeah, bringing it all together essentially, and then then they go, oh yeah, that really makes sense now. And that's kind of how you build the trust. And yeah, obviously the website is kind of brings it all together, in my opinion.
And I suppose that the key element there, especially when people do have access to more information, but they're also, you know, looking at the kind of negatives and positives, and potentially considering trust components in terms of, say, social proof, for example. Do you think that's important to be able to back up your story? Because obviously you can tell your story, it can be an element of UX, but then if people don't trust it, they're not going to go with it. And I suppose the either external stamp of a third party, or other people that have enjoyed your product and had use from your product, that helps build the trust that gets them over the line. So I'm wondering if you've got any kind of key examples of that. I think what I've seen recently in terms of clients I work with as well is kind of key partnerships, especially with that have authority and are kind of well trusted. Having that kind of resonance with another brand really helps improve all metrics. But yeah, it'd be good to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah, no, a brand is a really good brand sort of partnership is a really good example, actually, not one you hear that often. But yeah, there's lots of things, you know, from a psychology point of view, you know, the authority, the theory of authority is that, you know, if you use somebody who is well known and well trusted, it doesn't have to be famous, it could be like a doctor, or, you know, somebody, you know, in a high regarded profession, who, you know, and you have the sort of tone of voice coming from them in some areas of the website, for example, that can really speak to them, and they're like, okay, well, they've got the backing of this person, or, you know, it just gives that trust element, absolutely. And yeah, trust is huge. And there's lots of other, you know, this is a huge subject really, in terms of you know, having that sense of community as well. The more people that you can see sort of engaged in the brand, so yeah, obviously testimonials, case studies are imperative, and you know, trust indicators, so being a member of a community in the industry that you're in, is another, you know, demonstration that you're not shying away from anything, you're out there. Obviously awards, all these kind of things are huge trust indicators, and yeah, there's you know, do as much as you can really, and then what's relevant to the brand.
It's like the 9 out of 10 dentists recommend Oral-B thing, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, that was not in a B2B context, but
that's exactly it, yeah. So but there's lots of examples from you know, a B2B as well, but no, I've definitely seen like I'm just trying to think of an example.
Well, I guess if I can just jump in on that bit, is I guess from my background, a lot of it has been in the IT world. So quite often you see a hardware manufacturer partnering with Intel, for example. So Intel Inside is probably the greatest example from a tech perspective, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a really good one. I think the more you can bring actual humans into it, I think it's better as well. You know, having a voice that you know is out there in front of the brand, and, you know, somebody who backs you up and is quite outspoken about it is you know, really important. I can think of, you know, a few from a charity set point of view, and, you know, they do work with businesses as well. You know, they bring on authority figures. So it might be somebody famous, or somebody in who's doing really good work in their area. So Prince William, whatever. And then that's I think, is it Trust that uses Prince William?
There's so many. I think he's the patron of many charities, isn't he?
Yeah. Exactly. So just things like that, and Intel is definitely a good example, but I'm going to try and think, but I can't think off the top of my head. I'm definitely at the end of term sort of.
I think the awards, as you kind of mentioned, is a really interesting thing, especially kind of in the B2B context, or I'm sure Andy knows kind of from agencies, where kind of agencies or professional services companies kind of based everything on awards. We've won this award, we've won that award. I suppose it was interesting in terms of then somebody going to that professional services company, if it's just considered to be table stakes. They're an award-winning agency or provider of these services, but does that really matter? You've just got a few kind of awards. But a lot of companies just apply all the time and effort to try and get those awards. But sometimes it's a bit kind of navel gazing because they don't actually know how much it's kind of influencing in that way.
I think there's a lot to be said about the credibility of those awards as well. I mean, how many of those are just bought? £1,000 for a table gets you the award. So,
well, I have it on good authority that it doesn't get you the award. The judges apparently do not know who has bought the tables and who's bought the number of seats. All of that.
I think it depends on the awarding organisation.
Maybe,
as Ed knows, one of my hats is we run an architectural practice, and we're brand new. And yet last year we were awarded Best Residential Architecture Practice in the East of England. It's like, okay, thanks, that's great. We'd love to have the award, but on what basis did you establish our merits to award that? I think the market's awash with rubbish like that. So
there's definitely more that are more credible than others. But I have heard of case studies where it has enhanced people's businesses tenfold within the year they got the award. So it's not to be sniffed at. It's definitely something I've been looking into recently as well. So that's kind of why I know a bit about it. But it's just a small psychological nugget you're planting in the the prospect, essentially. And if they're judging your business against another very similar one, and yours has got the award, then you're going to be the one that has that, is more likely to get that business, because it's the only thing that stands out. So from that point of view, it's definitely worth considering.
From so B2B context, a B2B context is always the classic kind of battle between messaging around doing as it says it does on the tin, right? So you're solving that job to be done. This product solves this problem to you, against a view of differentiation. Because if you have that, and I don't know, you're all CRMs and you all say the same thing, then it's just so vanilla. What do you think about that, Louisa, in terms of moving to a strapline of massively on the B2C side of Nike saying just do it? What does that mean, and bring to life everything in the brand? Against a view of, I have this B2B product or service and it solves my problem, but in a very kind of specific, kind of realist way rather than aspirational.
Yeah, I think you have to be in quite a privileged position to be able to use things like just do it, strap lines, and you have to earn your right. And you've got to start off with identifying a USP and making sure that is really clear. What you do, who you do it for, and why you're different. Those things really need to come across. So it's very clear and woven into what you do. And it should do. If you've got a clear mission, then or Simon Sinek's why, for example, that's a great way to start to identify why you're doing what you're doing, why the business is doing what you're doing, and it can kind of, and then you piece together how what you're offering is different and how it contributes to that and why. So that's a really good starting point if you're trying to find a story thread. But I do think it's really important to, and there's always a USP. Some people think we do the same, but you can find it. You can find it.
Have you used, I'd love to see any kind of like neuroscience studies or anything you'd recommend there in terms of, I don't know, the way people's brains light up when they, identify a particular story. Any resources that you think you could recommend?
There is, hang on a minute, I'm just trying to remember what it's called. So yeah, it's an experiment conducted by Paul J. Zak. And it is more related to charities and donating, but the theory is the same. It shows you how storytelling works and what it does to the brain and what the outcomes could potentially be. And yeah, because it demonstrates that you are more, you become more trustworthy of the brand, which relates to any, whether it's B2B, B2C, and the fact that you're just more willing to invest or donate or whatever it is. I think that's a really good case study to look up. I'm happy to share the link afterwards if you're sharing the recording anyway.
Yeah, perfect. Sounds good. Well, on that, perfect timing, keeping to time. Well, thanks so much, Louisa, and thanks, Andy, for contributing as well. I'm hoping this recording works. It's got my pause button there, and then I'll share it with the kind of wider group. But yeah, great. If I don't speak to you guys before, have a great Christmas and see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Louisa. Really interesting.
Happy Christmas. Thanks, Andy. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.